Hello and welcome to Frenemies on ILTV, where Israeli politics is being discussed in a not-so-good English. With me today, Amnon Morag, a peace activist. I am Ziv Maor, editor-in-chief of Mida. Let's begin.
פגע במרכז גן ילדים.
Israel's southern border with Gaza is experiencing an escalation in the security situation. Over 200 rockets have so far been launched towards Israel in what seems to be the peak of a 3-month situation where Palestinians throw kite bombs and balloon bombs toward the area, ruining fields all around the Jewish area surrounding Gaza. So this is what's happening now, and on the background we hear about discussions about some kind of resolution to the situation between Israel and Gaza. Amnon, what's your take on this?
Well, my take is I would be really happy to know what Netanyahu's strategy for Gaza is. I think that as citizens he owes this to us. And I don't know what it is. I mean, 10 years ago it was about bringing down the Hamas regime. And this is obviously not happening. Now, if he wants to reach long-term quiet agreement with Hamas, I think that's a good thing, but where was he in the past 4 years? Why does he have to reach this agreement after 4 months of terror attacks?
Well,
after 8,000 acres of our land have been burned. What is happening now is that our deterrence is suffering a blow, and we seem like the side that only understands power, and Hamas is calling the shots.
Yeah, well, we just heard Hamas stating that to some extent they have gained deterrence against Israel. And this very claim is very disturbing. Now, as for a long-term negotiation, well, this language came out from the other side. It was published 2 days ago in Lebanon. Israel officials have yet to endorse this specific language. I don't think personally that Hamas has any standing despite the kite and balloon bombs, despite the past 24 hours, to demand any kind of long-term situation. Now, as for a long-term strategy, well, what you've heard constantly from Israeli government whenever there was any kind of escalation in the past few years is that the Hamas government in Gaza is in charge. Now, I think that the Israeli government should move on than this. We've seen in the past 2 months with the demonstration on the Gazan border, we've seen tens of thousands of Gazan citizens protesting against Israel in a very dangerous situation, basically proclaiming that they are willing to die for their causes. Now, if this is the case, it is their responsibility, the responsibility of the citizens, rather than of the government, to protest against the corrupt, the terrorist, the racist, the tyranny of the Gazan government and the Hamas government, the Hamas regime. And when they eventually do that, they will be backed by Israeli government and the Israeli military.
I mean, I wish that this would happen. I hope, I mean, if the citizens of Gaza will go ahead and topple the Hamas regime or change its ways, or if Hamas will decide to change its ways, that would be great, but I'm not counting on it. I'm an Israeli citizen voting for the Israeli government, and I expect my prime minister to have a long-term vision for Gaza and to implement it.
Well, the vision and the strategy, the current strategy, is to maintain. Now, from time to time, this strategy proves to be failing to some extent when you see that there is some turmoil among Israeli citizens, especially when the south is under attack. Now, for our viewers abroad, this situation is incomprehensible. The fact that there is a whole region, tens of thousands, maybe more than 100,000 citizens of Israel are being attacked by shells each and every day, this demands for a response. But a strategy on behalf of Netanyahu can be spotted, it can be understood out of the situation, which is to maintain, whenever there is an escalation, to respond wisely. Everybody understands that sending troops into Gaza will not serve the Israeli interests all the time. No one, even in the right, still have dreams or realistic dreams on going back and undoing the ethnic cleansing that was conducted over there in 2005 in the disengagement. But the thing is that when you look at it long term, when you look at the past 10 years, indeed, Netanyahu broke his promise to overthrow Hamas, but the situation in Gaza is maintained. It is bad, but it is maintained.
I think if we are not planning to topple the Hamas regime, What we need to do is reach a long-term agreement with Hamas. We need to relieve some of the economic restrictions. We need to make a long-term situation that is livable in the southern part of Israel. This is not what we have today. And I'll tell you what I think the strategy is. The strategy is there is no strategy. We're just going to avoid political risk. And the war is a political risk for Netanyahu, and an agreement is also a political risk. So only when Netanyahu is with his back against the wall, after 4 months of attacks against Israel, this is the time that he finds to go and try to reach this agreement that he should have reached 4 years ago, because the circumstances today are very good for Israel. Well, we have relations with the Arab world, we have a favorable US administration, Hamas is at a low point politically and economically, and we're not leveraging this to our advantage. It's possible today to reach an agreement that serves the Israeli interest.
I second that. The fact is that strategically, Israel is at the most dangerous point that it has been for a few years. Now, as for Israel's responsibility, for example, for economic relief in the Gaza Strip, what responsibility at this point does Israel have, beyond the fact that we are most generously keep providing them electricity, which they use to construct and to send rockets towards our cities?
It's not a matter of responsibility. It's a matter of what is good for us. Now, today we're letting in 18 trucks of goods a day. That's 2% of the exports that were before 2007. We're giving permits to 4,000 Palestinians a month.
Now, there is a reason for that,
with 500,000. No, most of it. I'm all for security restrictions. But the idea, back in 2000, when this started by the Olmert government, this was a misguided policy from the start. It wanted the citizens of Gaza to rise up against and topple the Hamas regime because of economic pressure. It's been a decade now, and this hasn't happened.
Yeah, but
so what do we do now? This is a misguided policy.
Now, first of all, it's time to acknowledge that the left track that we've been moving on up until 2005 has proven to fail. There is no doubt up to this point the situation before this engagement
the left in 2005 was not in power most of the 13 years. It's 10 years.
You cannot deny that the disengagement is a leftist policy, regardless of who executed eventually and why. Either way, the situation was better. Now we have to think apart from the illusions and the fantasies that the Israeli left has.
When was the situation
before 2005?
Before 2005,
regardless of the fantasies that the Israeli left listed.
More Israeli citizens and soldiers died before the disengagement than after in the same period of time.
And the ability of the military to respond and to maintain control over the situation whenever terrorism attacks.
We were not inside the cities before 2005.
We were inside the cities when it was needed. Not steadily, whenever the terrorism was launched and the control that we had over it, the information that we had, the intelligence that we had.
It makes sense for them to invest in rockets and tunnels because they can't hurt citizens and soldiers inside Gaza. They killed more people before the disengagement.
Well, this is...
But they invested in these kind of technologies because they couldn't do it anymore.
This sounds like a great achievement. Before 2005, they had the possibility to terrorize about 10,000 people. Now they have the motivation to terrorize about 100,000 people because we're no longer there.
I think the situation right now is not good, but I think that despite, like going back to the disengagement, and whining about this left-wing policy 13 years ago. You have the right wing in power for 9 years now, almost 10 years. Why isn't the situation changing? Well, this is on the right-wing government. And talking about left-wing policies that were executed by a right-wing government 13 years ago, this is just a diversion.
So I think that conservative...
The nation-state law is still high on the agenda after the protest that happened last Saturday and several appeals to the Supreme Court that were filed this week. I personally hope that these appeals will not be accepted. I think this is a matter for the Knesset to decide, and I hope that in the end of the day, we will enact the Proclamation of Independence that says that Israel is a Jewish state with equal civil rights to all of its citizens as basic law in this country. What do you think?
Well, I think a few things. First of all, it's fair to say at this point, this is the end of the news cycle as far as it goes to the nation-state law, and thus it is for us to summarize what's going on here and what are the long-term implications of the debate that have been going on in this country for the past, I'd say, 2.5, 3 weeks. And the answer for me is, first of all, this is a debate that should have taken place before the bill has been legislated, and it has been on the table for over 6 years. What is the reason for which the elements that are stimulating those protests find reasonable to protest it against a democratic, completely fair, a majority-based legislation went through is beyond my understanding. I don't understand what do they have to protest against this. I mean, we have Druze representatives, 3 of them in the coalition. One of them is a minister. The citizens stand behind them, had the access to them. If they had anything to say to the government prior to the final legislation of this bill, they had every chance to do so. So this is to say that the protest, regardless of the merits, there is something dishonest about them.
I mean, fortunately, we're still a democracy, and unless there's a different version of democracy that I'm not aware of, in a democracy, you're allowed to protest whatever the government did, even if it was democratically decided.
You didn't hear me saying otherwise. You didn't hear me saying...
So what is the problem with a protest?
Well,
Why shouldn't, if you have thousands of people, 80,000 people last Saturday, going to protest this bill, this is the most democratic thing that could be, and I take pride in the fact that in Israel this is what we do.
Well, first of all, I do not hear me saying or claiming that the protests are illegitimate or illegal or should be banned whatsoever. They are indeed dishonest. I'm criticizing their conduct. I'm not saying that the police should be launched over them. This is my response to you and to other people who found it necessary to protest right now. You want another proof of dishonesty? Tzipi Livni just yesterday stood up in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, and stated, had very harsh words, not only against the bill itself, but also against the coalition and the government that promoted it. Now, Tzipi Livni sponsored this early version of the bill, which has much harsher language against the Arabic language regarding to Jewish settlements. All of those were in a legislation promoted by Tzipi Livni. The only thing that the left is frustrated about and ignites those protests is the fact that this legislation passed through a right-wing government and a right-wing coalition. There is nothing about the merits.
What we are protesting is the fact that intentionally this nation-state law does not include the principle of equality for all the citizens, regardless of religion, race, and sex.
Well, of course,
this is what we're protesting, and this is not an accident. This is something.
This is not an accident. We agree on that.
Even before the law was enacted, this was what we talked about. We had Benny Begin's bill. I don't see any problem with it. It could have been a celebration of unity. The opposition was in favor of this bill.
It could not have never been a celebration of unity because the current Israeli left, which is no longer in control for over a decade at this point, well, cannot accept anything that the right-wing government does. Even when this government sends over 20 billion shekels to Arab villages in order to develop them and promote the situation of this population, the left still has something to say about it and still keeps calling its government racist, even though our tax money pays for this specific community's ability to develop. As for the merits themselves, you are right. This is no mistake that there is no equality in the nation-state basic law.
So please
because equality exists in other basic laws.
No,
now the thing is, well,
it actually doesn't exist also in the basic law of human dignity and liberty because of the same political forces that wanted it out.
Now this is the example.
I think when you legislate something that you have there's no other democratic state that has a law like the nation-state law. I think we should have it. I'm Zionist, and I think that it's okay. We need, even though this is self-determination of a particular exclusive identity, I think it's fine. This is a complexity that we can live with, but only if we strike the right balance that we had in the Proclamation of Independence, saying that if it's a Jewish state and Judaism is a particular group, we're still going to have equal rights to all the citizens.
You cannot truly find this balance in the Declaration of Independence because it does not exist. The Declaration of Independence let me make this point. Let me make this point. The Declaration of Independence is about 1,000... like a ghost, every now and then the issue of drafting Haredim to the Israeli military surfaces. Yesterday, the Supreme Court of Israel gave another chance or a longer time for the Israeli Knesset to legislate a new deal with Haredim, and Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, is struggling between the Haredim elements in his coalition, on the other hand, the positive secular elements, which are mostly Israel Beitenu, Lieberman's party, about some kind of negotiation of a deal that would do that. And there is always in the background some kind of statement that if a deal will not be eventually resolved, this would be what is causing an elections. Now, the way I see it, there is no merits to it whatsoever. I mean, this is the kind of debate that exists in the background. Nobody is truly disturbed by it, and thus there is no truly justification for it for elections. So what I'm really saying is, politicians are trying to manipulate us to justify either some reconstruction of the coalition or an actual need or desire on behalf of Netanyahu to find a reason to go to elections. What's your point about it?
So I think this is an issue that perhaps you can find some agreement on. I think that the essence of it, drafting Haredim to the military, while it is important for there to be equality on this issue, this is not the most important issue on the agenda. Concerning Haredim, I think it's much more important for them to be able to join the workforce in a way that does not compromise their customs.
Which happens, by the way. There is a great movement within the Haredim to join workforce, to achieve academic studies, and this is happening in this government and was promoted by this government and funded by it.
I think this is good. What I think we should care about is the equal opportunities for young Haredim to be able to integrate into the economy, into the society to the extent that they wish. And we want more people to join the workforce for the future of our economy.
So given that we can agree on this point, let me address a subdivision of this issue that disturbs me. The fact is that this dialogue is being conducted with the Supreme Court. You've mentioned earlier regarding to the nation-state bill that you hope for the appeals against the nation-state bill to be rejected because this is an issue to be resolved within the Knesset. The same goes for the issue of whether or not Haredim are being drafted or not. The fact that the Knesset, which is assembled by representatives of the public again and again, reaches some kind of agreement that is accepted by the many sides and the diverse assembly of this specific coalition, and it is not equal enough for the Supreme Court who decides for the Israeli public against the will of the representatives what is the right measure of equality on this topic. Would you agree on that?
I think in general, first of all, I don't like the notion that the Supreme Court should be weakened. I think it's important for a democracy to have a Supreme Court that does intervene when civil and human rights are involved. I think that this is the sort of cases that I also feel that we need less judicial intervention, especially because in this case, the Supreme Court is actually protecting the interests of the majority rather than the minority. I think that there are legitimate interests that are protected by law, so I think the appeals are legitimate, and I'm not sure that the Supreme Court can reach a different conclusion, but I would, of course, prefer for this to be settled politically, again, in a way that is balanced, because for having a full exemption of all Haredim with no targets for drafting to a certain extent, with no perhaps civil service, this is something that is problematic, and it hurts many people that feel that they are not being treated equally.
So as for equality, there is something that disturbs me for many years. I do believe to some extent that this debate over drafting of the Haredim is somewhat awkward. Why is that? Because when you look at the actual contribution that the Haredim has towards Israeli society, I'm not talking about studying Torah, which me as an observant person finds very important, but I'm talking about their volunteering on non-profits that promotes the needs of the poor and the needy in Israel. If you look at the biggest organizations that support the poor in terms of soup kitchens, in terms of loaning not only medical accessories but also toupees to women who are undergoing chemotherapy, you see that all of the organizations that tunnel millions of shekels are always managed by Haredim, and there are Haredim volunteers in it. One interesting thing to understand is that those organizations also operate in Arab communities, not only in the Jewish communities, they serve the entire Israeli population. Now, volunteering and donating to those organizations is something that is embedded in the Haredi culture, in the cultural DNA of this organization. They do not do this in order to cater to any extent the Israeli public. They do it because this is what they believe in. Now, when this is the case, when the average young Haredi volunteers 10 times, 20 times more than his secular friend, than his secular counterpart, the claim that there is an issue of inequality basically has no merits.
I think it's great that this culture is very positive. I would still say that when we talk about equality, equality is equality before the law and before the state. So volunteering, while it's something that we should be admired, I don't think this actually alleviates the concern about equality. But as I said, I think this is not the most important issue that we have, and even specifically with Haredim, I think the fact that this government is improving and integrating them into society, this is great. But at the same time, we still have problems. We still don't have education with core subjects of study such as English and math. These are things that we have to sort out.
So as regarding to political equality, I believe that we will close with it. The fact is that not only that Arabs are not being drafted in this country, there is no legal basis for it. The law demands that everybody will be drafted unless someone is being specifically exempt. Now, there are legal arrangements for the exemption of the Haredim legally. Technically, legally, there do not exist about the non-drafting of the Arabs. According to the law, they should be drafted. How about this inequality? Does this bother you at all?
This does not, I mean, I also think that in this case we need civil service for the Arab citizens
Why
of this country.
Why not go into the military and risk their lives like any other Israeli?
This is a decision that is made by the Israeli security
ministry. Now the point
ministry,
is that it's not in authorities,
no,
that's saying.
I mean, not looking at the reason for this exemption, this is silly. I think we need to, it's clear that this is something that
a direct response
our defense ministry and government doesn't want to enlist the Arab citizens of this country in the military.
When I thrown at you the fact that the Haredim volunteer, okay, and this is why they should be to some extent exempt for the army, you said, yeah, but legally there should be equality. Now I go with the same argument towards you about the Arabs. There is no legal equality with them. So you're saying according to the values or the reason or the justifications for them not being drafted, well, this justifies this inequality. So you have to decide.
You have, it's not that I have to decide, it's that the legal principle of equality does not say equality regardless of relevant differences. Where there is a relevant difference,
well, this has been Israeli Frenemies for today. I'm Non Morag, peace activist. Thank you very much for being with us. I was Ziv Maor, editor-in-chief of Mida, Israel's leading commentary website. Thank you and see you next week.